Hello, welcome back. I'm fighting for my life yet again. Surprise, surprise. I have controversial and or hot takes when it comes to books. I guess. I never thought I would be that person. I thought I was always on the right side of history. When it comes to books, I guess sometimes I just don't vibe with what everyone else is vibing with. I guess you could say I'm not like other girls. I'm sorry, I'm trying to laugh away the pain because this is actually really devastating to me that I have to make this video, but alas, what can I do, truly? I think as a reader, it's one thing to go into a book with zero expectations and have it not, kind of turn out good. And then it's a whole different level when you go into a book and you're like, oh my God, this is going to be so good. I know it's going to be good. Everyone loves it. The beginning started off amazing and you're just ready to devour. And then it turns out awful. Oh my God. I'm exaggerating a little bit. I don't think this book is awful. I just have so many issues with it. So before I get into anything, hello, welcome back. It's a new day, a new sleigh, and a new video where I have something to say. And unfortunately, that something is going to be a 30-40 minute rant of why I need to fight for my life when it comes to reviewing this book. For my new release for May, yes, this book technically came out in May. I know I'm reviewing it in June. It's just how it kind of ended up, but whatever, who cares? So this book came out in May, and the reason I found out about it was because I follow this one account on Instagram, and it's called Satisfiction Box, and they specifically do these special editions of books, and they they do book membership boxes where they'll send you, I think it's a book, and then they'll do teas or candles or any kind of self-care type things, and they released the promotional photo for a special edition with the sprayed edges of this book that I'm going to talk about today, which is Blood at the Root. So I saw that and I was like, wow, that looks really nice. I wonder what the book is about. So I looked up the book and it was marketed as a magical HBCU, very heavily influenced by things like Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, just the magical, nostalgic stories that we grew up with, but specifically from the perspective and with the main character as a Black boy. This was a debut novel. The person that wrote it is a playwright, so they're definitely not new to writing, but this was their first novel, and he specifically made it with the intentions of showing that Black boys and in general people of color can be the main characters of their stories. Me personally, that's something that is very close to my heart, and as a writer myself and someone that enjoys reading, I think it's incredibly important that we have stories like this. So when I learned about it, I was like, I am absolutely going to be reading this book. My local library did get a copy of the audiobook and the ebook, and I was so excited. I requested it on Libby. I booted it up. The introduction, chef's kiss. I loved it. The author's note was also read by the author, literally a performance. Truly, it was so good. I had that little feeling. I talked about it a little bit when I read Legendborn, that sometimes when I read certain books that are series, I can feel this is going to be my new obsession. The author's note, just hearing what he had to say about his book, and then the introduction to the book, literally, my jaw was on the floor. I loved it so, so much. And then I read the rest of it, and I'm actually angry. This is the worst possible feeling I've ever had as a reader. I've gone into books where I was like, this is probably not going to be good, and then it wasn't good, or I thought I might not like this, and I kind of did. And I've had a lot of different experiences as a reader. I've never had an experience where I was like, I'm going to like this book. I know I'm going to like this book. And I read something that I was like, this appeals to me directly, only for it to I can't even articulate. But honestly, I'm disappointed. So just as a spoiler-free summary, Blood at the Root surrounds the main character, Malik Barron. He is I believe he's 17-year-old kid, and he has magical abilities. He's a magician, why'd I say that? They call them conjurers. So he has a ton of different magical abilities, and after he turned 17, he's been in the foster care system because his mother died one night on the 4th of July after these people break into their home, and she essentially bursts into flames, very supernatural style, kind of. So Malik has to go into the foster care system, which he has been in for the last 10 years. He emancipated himself and goes back to rescue his foster brother. His name is Tay. While they are fleeing to go to California, Malik gets a mysterious note from a long-lost grandmother telling him to go visit her so that she can send him to this magical university called Cayman University. So the story follows Malik as he is learning how to control his magical abilities and figure out what happened to his mother, because even though he believed that she had been dead since 10 years ago, they find out that she might not be dead and she might just be lost somewhere in this world, and he makes it his mission to find where she went. And just from that, it's a really interesting story. It's got a good plot, and you would go into it and you would have a lot of expectations. And I'm here to tell you that, at least for me, it did not deliver. I'm not going to say that this is spoilers, but I'm specifically going to go into my critiques of the overall world building, the story aspects, before I go into more specific critiques about things that are directly related to the plot. So these are very minor. You could still read the book if you listen to these spoilers, but yeah, I mean, they're not really spoilers. I'm just analyzing. But just so you know, if you want to completely go into the book not knowing anything about it other than the summary, I would say stop now. Otherwise, you are free to continue. So I have two main critiques that kind of branch off into little mini ones. And these two main critiques have to do with the world building and the representation. Funny enough, I know, hear me out. Don't go into the comments just yet. Stay with me for a second. So I'm first going to go into the world building aspect of this, which my main issue with this story, actually I have a lot of issues. I'm not going to say the main one. I read fiction. I'm not going to sit here and say that I'm an expert or that I understand every single aspect or story elements that goes into writing fiction, but I know a lot. So with any kind of fiction story, the biggest obstacle will be the world building, that is establishing rules, laws, characters, things of that nature, right? And in this story, it's a magical aspect. These people have magical abilities. So making sure that the reader is rooted in the rules and the laws of this magical world is crucial to keeping a reader's attention. And this was something that I felt personally, now you can disagree, but this is what I felt, that I was not rooted in anything. And I think the main perpetrator for this critique that I have is the fact that we never get a good explanation of the magical abilities these people have. So I'll give some examples, because he mentions Harry Potter, Percy Jackson, things of that nature. In Harry Potter, they don't have magical abilities that are really specific to them. I mean, there's some exceptions, but they use spells, right? But there's specific spells that do specific things and that are casted using specific words. That's easy for us to understand. Okay, but not every spell can do everything that they do. Sometimes it requires potions, there's Horcruxes, there's a whole bunch of other stuff. And again, I hate bringing up Harry Potter. I hate to do it, but this is just an example. And I'm not going to say that J.K. Rowling is amazing at world building or whatever, but just for an example, in Percy Jackson, the powers that the demigods have are directly related to who their godly parents are. And they are consistent. All the children of Athena are pretty smart, right? All the children of Demeter are really good. They have a green thumb. They can plant anything. They got that vibe, right? Cottagecore, truly. I bring all this up to say that there are rules and things that are kept consistent for the reader's understanding. In this story, they can use magic to do anything, to the point where I'm questioning what limitations do they realistically have? And limitations and rules are so important when you have a magical story like this, because otherwise they're just OP. They just can do anything. So then you as the reader question, well, what is the problem? What is the conflict in this story if they can solve every issue with magic? So at the beginning, it seems as though Malik, the main character, his main obstacle is that he doesn't know how to control his magic, and he really doesn't have a good grasp on it, and he gets tired relatively easily. But when you go through the rest of the story, none of the other characters experience that. None of the other conjurers have any issues with quote unquote running out of energy. It's only him. On top of that, as Malik goes through the story, he goes from someone not really knowing how to use his magical abilities to suddenly knowing all these like hexes and spells, and he can do a whole bunch of stuff. And like we miss the crucial like training arc in the center. And this is like what I thought was interesting when I first started reading it, because Malik knows that he has magical abilities. He knows from the get-go. I haven't really seen a story where a character knows that they have magical abilities and uses them throughout their childhood. For example, Percy. He has magical abilities. He doesn't really know he has them until he gets to Camp Half-Blood. Harry from Harry Potter also has magical abilities and doesn't know how to use them properly. He's like been using them kind of, but like not intentionally, and he doesn't get a good grasp on how to until he gets to Hogwarts. At the start of the story, Malik knows that he has magical abilities since the age of 7. He uses those abilities from the ages of 7 to 17. He talks about using his magic frequently, which leads me to ask, how does he know how to use his abilities? They tell us that Malik doesn't know how to really control his powers, and he doesn't know how to do stuff. At the beginning of the story, he not only unlocks a car, like, steals a car, hotwires the car, manages to defend himself from 3 other people by like literally throwing them up in the air. He also attacks his previous foster parents, and that's all before he gets trained. And it's not as if like, oh, he's just like really emotional and it was like an emotional expelling of his magic. He was doing it intentionally. He had that in his mind of like, I need to get into this car. I need to defend myself. I need to do A, B, and C. And he was using his magic purposefully. So to go from that and then to then tell us that, oh, he needs to go to this magical university to figure out how to use his abilities, I'm a little like, well, it seems like he kind of does, right? I mean, he's doing all this stuff relatively well. The only thing that I'm seeing is that he gets tired, but that like plot reasoning for why Malik needs to get to Cayman University is like, I couldn't get down with it, because I'm like, he seems like he knows how to use his abilities, even though they're not like exact all the time. He seems like he's got a pretty good grasp, TBH, but I was like, whatever, I can excuse that. That's fine. What I can't excuse is the fact that their magic is essentially a deus ex machina, and I will go into that right now. If you don't know, deus ex machina it translates to God in the machine, and is used to describe an element of a story that's just meant to like fix everything. Wikipedia says it is a plot device whereby a seemingly unsolvable problem in a story is suddenly or abruptly resolved by an unexpected and unlikely occurrence. And honestly, that's the entirety of the magic wielding in this story. I'll give a great example that absolutely infuriated me. So at one point, Malik, and this is not a spoiler, Malik is on campus and he can't leave because there's danger, whatever. And the chancellor of the university specifically puts like a hex on him, so he physically can't leave the university. So Malik, who again we're supposed to believe is a newbie and doesn't really know how to use his magic, just explaining this is like giving me a hernia. So the reason Malik wants to get off campus is because he wants to check on his foster brother Tay, who is currently living with Malik's grandmother, Mama Aya, right? But they are living off campus of the university, and Malik wants to go see them. So he FaceTimes his brother Tay and says, Tay, put the phone on the ground. I'm about to do something. And he says, okay. Malik, newbie, doesn't know how to use his magic, somehow uses a spell to transport himself through the Wi-Fi of the phone and materialize himself into Mama Aya's home. If you watch Miraculous, he essentially Lady Wi-Fi's himself to Mama's Aya. Oh my god. I'm okay. I have to calm down. I'm a serious reviewer. I have serious opinions and I have serious critiques. I can't get heated like this, but I'm a little heated. So let me ask, what kind of spell does that and why? That spell feels like the only reason it exists is so that Malik can be at Mama Aya's house for important plot reasons. Because that spell is never casted again. No one else uses it in the story. And I'm going to bet $50, $50. I will sell it to the author. I'm gonna bet that it'll never ever come up in the rest of the series. Their magic can literally do anything. And as the reader, I don't really feel grounded because I'm supposed to believe that Malik can transport himself through the pixels of the internet. I know that doesn't make sense, but bear with me. He can do that, but his grandmother, who is like this famous conjurer, like uber powerful conjurer, couldn't find him. And that she also couldn't find his mom. And on top of that, there's also a plot where there's kids that are going missing from the university. And you mean to tell me that they can't use magic to find them? I'm losing my mind. I'm actually losing my mind. They can teleport. They can go to past memories and view it like a 3D experience. He can teleport through Wi-Fi. They can heal diabetes. Oh my God. But they can't locate missing people. How? And then, as I mentioned earlier, we never really see Malik training his abilities. We're supposed to believe that he doesn't have a really good grasp on it. And then by the end of the story, he's like teleporting and doing all these like spells and stuff that seem inconsistent with his experience level. And again, I'll bring up Harry Potter, which is like, but at the end of book 1, like Harry has learned some spells. He has like, okay, you know, very basic level of like spell casting and all that stuff. At the end of book 1, when Harry is face to face with Professor Quill and Voldemort by extension, like Harry Potter didn't Avada Kedavra that dude. He doesn't know that spell. His way of dealing with that situation and defeating Professor Quill is consistent with his experience level. I can't really get down with Malik going up against heavily experienced conjurers and people that are like feared, like literally the villains of this story, and he's holding his own. I don't see him holding his own using a magical ability that we're supposed to believe, that we are told he doesn't know how to control. My experience reading this book, other than like not really understanding the magic system, is not understanding their world. I have a multitude of questions. Let me pull them up actually. One, like who has magic in this story? Like what are the qualifications? Because they don't make it seem like this is an HBCU magical university, right? But they don't make it seem like every Black person has innate magical abilities. So my question is like, what is the distinction? Again, Percy Jackson, if you are born from a god, you are a demigod, and that is how you have that ability. There is a distinction between regular people and the demigods. I don't see the distinction in this story. And on top of that, they also mention that there's tribes in the story. I don't understand that as well. They list a ton of different tribes, and I'm telling you, on my life, if you put to my head and asked me to differentiate between all of them, I couldn't do it. I also question just the separation between like the regular human world, for lack of a better term, and this magical world, because they seem like so intertwined. So one of the other main characters, which is the love interest for Malik, her name is Alexis. As I mentioned, one of the like big, I guess, like conflicts in the story is that there's missing kids, right? Alexis is angry that there's this girl, her name is Katya. She went missing, but the university doesn't seem to care. But for all intents and purposes, Katya is not like a magical, she's not a conjurer. She doesn't have any magical abilities. This was a like regular person. So my question is, why did Alexis hone in on this one girl? What reasoning does Alexis have for thinking that that one girl's disappearance is related to all the students that are going missing from Cayman University? We also never get a good number of how many people are going missing. They're just like, oh my God, there's like a whole bunch of missing kids. And we don't like see the missing kids. Like I never really felt any kind of sense of urgency to find them. And you know, I don't mean to be rude, and I really hate to tear down a book like this, but I feel like I'm reading a first draft. I feel like there were so many world building questions that it seems like weren't asked because they're not answered in the narrative. Honestly, like reading the story, I never got a really good sense of why I was reading it, I never got a good idea of what was driving the plot. Because so there's, I think, a point in every kind of fantasy story where you're like, okay, this is where the adventure begins. This is where I'm like locked in. We have this goal to accomplish. We have to figure out this mystery. We have to do A, B, and C. And starting from here is when that adventure begins. For Percy Jackson, it's when they get the prophecy and Percy has to go find the missing lightning bolt. Okay, from that point on, you're locked in. In fantasy books, there's a point where you get locked in, where you know that from this point on, is adventure, is the rest of the story, is where we answer the important questions that are posed at the beginning of the story. In this book, I never got that sense. I never knew when I needed to like be locked in or when the narrative or the characters were telling me important information that I needed to remember. And part of that is because like a big chunk of the story is like, for a lack of a better term, the character's just like fooling around. So again, the main conflicts, Malik has to A, figure out how to use his magical abilities, B, find out what happened to his mom, and C, and which he doesn't really know he's supposed to do, but he's supposed to do, find out what happened to all those missing people. For number one, I already mentioned, I never felt like he really got a good grasp, or I never saw the arc of him learning how to use his magical abilities, so I was never locked in to that like plot line. Malik finding out what happened to his mom, at the beginning of the story, he's like, oh yeah, my mom is dead. And then all of a sudden he finds out that she might be alive. And the reason I never got locked into that storyline is because from the beginning, Malik already thinks his mom is dead. And from that point to when he figures out that his mom might actually still be alive, I never really see how much the impact of him losing his mom has on him. Like, other than the fact that, yeah, losing a parent is like really traumatic and he has to go into the foster system and that's awful. I never, like, they don't really give us a lot of good flashbacks, at least at the beginning, or kind of like ground us in why he would be so intent on finding out what happened to her in terms of like their proximity, how close of a relationship that they had. It almost feels very secondary to the plot because like from the beginning, Malik's strongest connection is with Tay, his brother. So I would understand if like at some point Tay goes missing and he's like, I have to find my brother, because we get their relationship very, very early on. Oh my God, I hate bringing up all these other books, but it's because they were said in the author's note and were directly noted as an inspiration or just like something that was influential in the author's life, I feel like these connections can't be like ignored. In Percy Jackson, when his mom, like he thinks his mom is dead, we get the first full chunk of the book where they have an amazing relationship. He talks about how much he loves his mom, all their like good memories together, and we get like a good idea of their relationship and their dynamic where I, as the reader, feel compelled to root for Percy as he finds out what happens to his mom. With Malik, I mean, just because his mom died at the beginning doesn't mean that we, as the reader, still can't get a good idea of what their relationship is like or what impact her loss has on him as a character. It reads almost like he feels as though he has to figure out what happened to his mom, like just because. Because it also doesn't even seem like Mama Aya, his literal grandma, is intent on figuring out what happened to her daughter. I know what it is. There is a very significant lack of urgency. This book lacks that specific plot driving device, which is urgency, a reason that things need to happen. The only urgency that we have for Malik learning how to control his magical abilities is just that, like, well, he almost exposes the magical world frequently, so they're like, we need to really get this under control. So whatever, okay. That's pretty low level. That's pretty low stakes in terms of urgency. Him finding out what happened to his mom, there's no urgency there. There's no real driving force other than just like, I thought my mom was dead. She might still be alive. I should figure out what happened to her. But other than that, there's no sense of urgency. And the missing kids, there's zero urgency there. Literally none. It never affects Malik directly as a character. It only affects his love interest. And even then, she's only like honed in on this one girl that went missing, which in my perspective, I'm just like, why this one specific girl? Because they say like missing kids, plural, like there's so many missing kids. And of course, all of them individually and as a group are valid and, you know, people would want to find them and that's understandable. But for her to like really hone in on this one person makes me think that they should be incredibly crucial to the plot. Honestly, not really. They're really not. Which goes into my next biggest criticism, which is the representation. Okay, so this book is marketed as being kind of like a love letter to the Black boys of the world and just showing them that they can be the main character and they too can be magical, which is great, which is lovely. I never felt like I shouldn't read this book as a non-Black cis woman. I think books can be like made for a specific demographic without alienating other people that might want to read the book. And unfortunately, with this book, I kind of felt alienated. I felt, and again, this is my perspective, if someone else believes differently, if someone else had a different reading experience, that is fine. This is just how I felt, and this is not by in any way the purposeful intention or the way that you're supposed to read this book. This was my interpretation, but I felt that this book heavily objectified women. Right now I'm going to focus on the love interest for Malik, and her name is Alexis. First of all, Alexis is another foster kid that went into a group home with Malik when they were both about 7 years old. He finds out, at first they like kind of, they fight their kids, whatever. And eventually he finds out that she also has magical abilities. How much time they spend together at the group home, I'm not really sure. But Malik talks about her frequently at the beginning of the story, and later on says that he has been in love with her since he was 7. They really try to sell us this like childhood best friends to lovers kind of romance. It was actually a nightmare to think about. Alexis eventually gets adopted by a family and they never see each other again until they reunite at 17 years old. So for 10 years, Malik has not seen this girl and has hyper fixated on her for the last 10 years. I don't know if that's supposed to come across as romantic. To me, it comes across as creepy, especially because upon reuniting at 17 years old, Malik is incredibly possessive of her. Anytime Alexis interacts with someone of the opposite sex, he is immediately trying to gauge whether or not they are in a romantic relationship and or sexual relationship. Again, not having seen this girl in 10 years, meeting her at the age of 7, and thinking that he has any kind of say in her romantic relationships. Childhood friends to lovers works best, in my opinion, when they're actually childhood friends, not people that cross paths for like X amount of months at the age of 7. And especially not when they reconnect in the future and one person is incredibly possessive and constantly degrades the other person for their potential relationships with other people. So anytime that Alexis and Malik get into a fight, he will accuse her of hooking up with other dudes. Okay, this is kind of spoilers. You can skip this part if you don't want to know, but this is specifically about what happened to Katya. I'll also include a trigger warning for implied SA. So please skip this part if you don't want to know about it, and that's fine. I'll include a time when it's safe to come back. So in this chapter, we find out that Katya is dead and that she was murdered by these 2 men that specifically kidnapped her, and it's heavily implied that she was sex trafficked. And I take issue with this being the reason that Katya was murdered. It seems like it's done a little bit for shock value, and so that Alexis as a character has a reason to essentially torture Katya's murderers. I also take issue with this because the other missing kids are murdered for the villains, which are the Bokor, so that they can steal their magic. This doesn't happen to any of the other missing kids. Again, Katya is the only regular human person to be kidnapped, as far as we know, because they don't mention anyone else, and she's the only character that is assaulted. It doesn't sit right with me that the only person that we focus on as like a missing person, and I could be misremembering, but I also feel like she's the only female missing person that gets brought up and mentioned by name specifically. So for her to be the only one and to be assaulted in this way and die gruesomely, it doesn't sit right with me. It doesn't feel good. And I always ask when things of this nature, when heavy topics are brought up in books, would it change the narrative if this was not included? If Katya as a character had been kidnapped and murdered in the same way as the other children that were murdered as sacrifice for the Bokor, that would not have changed the narrative in any kind of way. Alexis could have still been upset. She could have still been angry enough to do what she did. If you take out something traumatic happening to a character and it doesn't change the narrative, then it's done for shock value. Then it doesn't need to be there. This, to me, doesn't need to be there. It's too graphic, it's too violent, and it seems too much like it's done for shock value. So I take heavy issue with. Actually, heavy issue with. Stop abusing female characters for plots. I'm begging you. It doesn't need to happen. We can still have an entertaining story without this happening. Dear God. So Alexis, because she's upset and angry, she calls on her ancestors and she uses magic to essentially curse Katya's murders for all of eternity. She uses what's called Bane magic, which is very taboo. It's not good. And after they get back to Mama Aya's house, Alexis and Malik are talking about it. End of spoiler-free section, end of trigger warning section now. Okay. So when Alexis and Malik get back to Mama Aya's house, they're talking about Bane magic. And Bane magic is essentially a taboo. Honestly, I can't explain it very well, but it's just like, it's not good. Alexis is telling Malik that she had to do it, and Malik is like, no, you shouldn't have. That's bad. So she tells him, like, you wouldn't understand. The only person that understands me is Danye. Like, I have to stick up for people, and you guys just don't want me to. So after Alexis heavily goes in on her activism and fights for Katya and all the other missing people and rallies for the professors, for the tribes to provide aid and figure out what's happening to these missing children. And after her going through all these feelings of helplessness because she can't help people in the way that she wants to, all these conflicting emotions and having nobody on her side, you know what Malik says to her? He says, oh, so that's it. I knew you and, he says a word that I will not say, were fucking. He only focuses on her saying, only Danye understands me, and insults her by insinuating that they are hooking up. She's literally talking about not being able to do enough for people that are going missing and not being able to help the people that need it the most. And he's focused on whether or not her and this other dude are hooking up. If I'm supposed to hate Malik, this is a greatly written book. But unfortunately, I'm not supposed to hate Malik. I hate that dude. He's awful as a person. He's a bad person. I got the sense that he was a bad person from the beginning of the story. And I thought, I was like, oh, this is going to be like an anti-hero kind of situation. We're not supposed to like Malik. Okay, this is good. Malik is supposed to be someone that we root for. And I can tell you from my chest, I hoped time and time again that that dude would fail. Because I hated Malik as a character. He's an awful human being. He objectifies women. He's awful. On top of the fact that he's homophobic. So I'm going to specifically cite chapter 12 as the entire reason why I hate Malik and he's an awful human being. Okay, so in rapid fire succession, they're going to a party, right? Okay, he sees Alexis come out in her party outfit and, to compliment her because he's such a gentleman, he says to himself in his mind, it takes everything in me not to be a creep. You mean you have to stop yourself from being a bad person? Normally, people would just say, hey, you look really nice tonight, and that would be it. This is some of his narration when he's at the party. These are just like my little highlighted, just like I see these lines in my nightmares. I hear this dialogue in my nightmares. So I'm gonna share it with the rest of you. Again, all of these are about women. So throwing that ass with supernatural speed on the downbeat. Haha, funny. A group of scantily clad hotties. I laugh at that line because what do you mean scantily clad? What is this? The 1600s? Scantily clad? Are you joking? I have to assume he's never touched a woman in his life for him to say someone is scantily clad. That is corny. Corny. Oh my god. They twerk them goodies while the music pulsates. Again, he's saying all this stuff about all these women, right? And still demands that Alexis stay faithful to him when they are not even in a relationship. Do you see what I mean? Like the double standards, the just like pure objectification of women. I'm gonna say this. This book barely passes the Bechdel test. The only reason it does is because there's flashbacks where his mom and Mama Aya are speaking to each other. The rule of them having a conversation about anything other than a man is like hanging by a thread. It's the bare minimum. They're barely making that benchmark, I hope you realize. So at this party, Danye, the person that is his romantic rival, he's having an argument with these two other people, a girl and a guy, and it's like a lover's quarrel or whatever. And Malik says, Danye is, I start to ask, sexually fluid. Sivan stops me from saying something whatever phobic that was gonna spill from my mouth. So Sivan is non-binary, they, them, which is great, and Malik never misgenders them, which is also great. However, he says to stop me from saying something whatever phobic. To say the term whatever phobic, in my perception, again, this is my interpretation, is incredibly dismissive. It really comes across as him being like, oh, I don't want to offend anybody. Everyone's so sensitive these days. Like, everything I say is something phobic. Like, he's not even acknowledging that it's like homophobic. It comes across as him saying like, oh my god, there's so many ways to offend somebody nowadays. Like, I can't even keep up with the phobics or whatever. And it doesn't even happen once. It happens multiple times throughout the narrative. Later on, so Malik lives on campus now and he has a roommate. So once he goes into the dorm room, he says that he can hear someone getting their, his roommate is male, and the person that also comes out of the room after actions is also male. So after his roommate sees his guest out, he goes back to the kitchen and he's like eating Fruit Loops or whatever. And Malik says, and he eats that shit like he didn't just have a word that I won't say come out of his room. And I bring this up because it could have very easily been like a funny line of like, as if I didn't just walk in and hear that of like, what are you doing? It's like 11 a.m. That would have been funny. But the joke in this instance is that he is having sex with another man. That's supposed to be the joke. You know, in this good month of June, I'm not laughing. I don't think it's funny. I am neglecting to see what the joke is in this scenario. And then he goes on to say, so you an old dude? I ask, trying not to sound ignorant. Sometimes people grow up with a certain mindset and then later on in life they're like, oh no, that's actually wrong. And sometimes we have to unlearn the things that we are taught as children. That is valid. For Malik to constantly be doing this to a point where he's like always about to say something ignorant and then like tries to tell us like, oh no, I didn't though, is ridiculous, is actually delusional, because it seems like it's only there for comedic purposes and it doesn't ever seem like he's learning or actively trying not to be a bad person. Ignorant stuff is the first thing that comes to his mind, and he like, for the life of him, can't stop himself from saying it or a version of it, and he's just in his mind saying like, oh well, I could have said something really worse, but I only mildly offended someone. There's also a character that comes up for all of like a paragraph maybe, and this is a deaf character. And I'm going to bring this up because I'm not deaf. I took some sign language classes. Well, I took one. I took a sign language class when I was in college, and I have some of my family members that are hard of hearing and communicate primarily through American Sign Language. So this character comes up to the chancellor and is signing, and Malik doesn't know what she's saying. And the chancellor responds signing, but also talking at the same time. And then, as this character leaves the scene, they write what they're trying to say in the air so that Malik can read it. I take issue with this for multiple reasons. If you want to have deaf characters in your story, that's great, that's wonderful. This, I think, just missed the mark and would have really benefited from having someone that communicates primarily through American Sign Language, or someone that is just a part of the deaf community, to read specifically this section. Because, again, I'm not like a member of the community. I won't say that. But from my experiences, it's very uncommon for people who are fluent in sign language to speak and sign at the same time. Speaking and signing is typically, at least in media, for the benefit of the viewer if they do not know sign language already. In a lot of classes, honestly, like other people that I knew while I was in college that were majoring in ASL, they were not speaking while they were signing, because that's just not common. That's just not what they do. Of course, there are some people that can read lips, but it's not common. And if you know sign language, why would you also speak? They can understand your signs. So for the Chancellor to speak at the same time that he is signing, to me, signifies that his speaking is only for the benefit of Malik so that he can understand what is being said, and us as the reader to understand what is being said. I'm also pretty sure that that is the reason, because she writes in the air what she says next. She doesn't sign it. She doesn't give like a little wave or whatever. She specifically uses a spell to write in the air so that Malik can read it. And you can call me nitpicky for this, but there is a culture. There is deaf culture. And this is disrespectful, in my opinion. Again, I'm not a part of the community, so if someone feels differently, that's fine. But as just like a viewer, someone on the outside, I feel like it's disrespectful. There could have been a very easy way for Malik to understand, or at least convey to us as the reader, that this person that is using sign language is like frantic, or they seem worried, or other ways that we could understand what they're talking about without knowing exactly what they're saying. That emotion could have still been conveyed, because the only reason that that character is there, and the only reason we know what they're like trying to say, what they're signing, is because she's worried that she is going to have to leave the university because of all the missing kids. I think there was another way that that could have been conveyed to us as the reader without having to have this character write what they're saying when she's having a conversation with another person that knows sign language. Do you understand what I'm trying to say here? Like, I really don't think that that was genuine. And I know that there are some people that don't think that issues of like representation, or in this instance misrepresentation, are valid critiques of books. For me, I think that in this instance, a book that was heavily marketed as being incredibly inclusive, and from the get-go, from the author's own words, is meant to be inclusive, for it to have all these glaring misrepresentations of people is a valid criticism. Because you can make, again, as I said earlier, you can make a book that is meant to be for a specific demographic, that can cater more heavily to one demographic than others. But that doesn't mean that you can also alienate other people that want to read the book. It's a disservice to you, and it's a disservice to us as readers. I feel that the women in the story are heavily objectified. The issue I have with the way that women are represented is mainly because of Alexis, because her as a character, she's like, we're supposed to believe that she's very like strong and independent, but anytime it comes to Malik, she like immediately folds. I never see her have a strong kind of like opinion or go against Malik in any kind of way, especially when he's not acting correctly. She feels very two-dimensional, honestly, one-dimensional. She has no kind of arc. And again, spoilers for the end of the book. I'm gonna go into it right now, so if you don't want to know, I suggest you click off this video, and or you can skip all the way to the end where I kind of do my wrap up. But here we go. Whoop-de-doo, surprise twist that is not surprising to anyone. Alexis is actually working with the Bokor. I'm not explaining any of this well, and it's because it's so disjointed. So anyway, the main villain of this story is the Bokor, which is like a tribe of people that can, I don't know what they can do, but they essentially kill children to steal their magic because they don't have it themselves. The reason that the Bokor are coming back, the Death Eaters, if you will, because it's essentially what they are. So Malik has this mentor very forced mentor. We never see them have a good relationship, and then all of a sudden he's like, I'll be your mentor, and then all of a sudden Malik is super attached to this dude. It's not explained very well. Okay, I can't remember this professor's name, but anyway, he becomes Malik's mentor. And then, surprise, surprise, he actually raised the Bokor from the dead or something of that nature because his brother was killed and he wants to get revenge. This is thrown on so last minute. The reasoning is so, like, I can't even get down with it because it's never alluded to. We have no hints throughout the narrative. That's a different story. We find out that Alexis is helping him because he promises her power so that she can do her activism. So Alexis betrays Malik, and that's supposed to be really surprising to us. It's really not. But, you know, I won't list that as a critique because whatever, you know, it's a mystery. Some people pick up on it, some people don't. So I won't say that. But I will say, though, we're supposed to feel so betrayed and we're supposed to feel Malik's heartbreak. But I really don't, again, because he objectifies Alexis so much and he's so possessive of her. They are not in a relationship of any kind. They have a sexual relationship towards the end of the book. Cool, fine, whatever. His affection and his relation to her is built on a relationship that he started at 7 years old. Honestly, I never, ever get the sense that Alexis has any kinds of genuine feelings for him other than sexual attraction. He disrespects her left and right, constantly accuses her of hooking up with other dudes. He slut shames the heck out of Alexis. And then she turns around and she gets dickmatized so hard that she all of a sudden falls in love with him. That bothers me to no end. I absolutely hated that for her. I've never seen a woman be so disrespected in a book before. So we're supposed to be all upset with Malik. We're supposed to feel betrayed. I'm not betrayed. I rooted for her. And then it's even weirder because at the end of the book, after everything is like done or whatever, we're moving on to book 2 setup, right? Alexis isn't like on any kind of like wanted list or nothing. They just expel her from the school. And that's the extent of her punishment. And on top of that, she literally texts him and they meet up at the end of the book. Could you imagine? Could you fathom that happening in any other fantasy book where literally, as far as we know, the villain of the story just casually meets up with the hero and nothing happens? I was reading the Goodreads reviews from other people and I was really nervous to make this video because I didn't see too many people bringing up these issues that I felt were really apparent. And again, there are people that don't really take into account this like representation or issues that are considered like social and not quote unquote a part of the narrative. They really don't like take that into account, and of course there are readers like that, but no one even brought up like these glaring world building issues that I felt were like, it felt like asteroids punching through this novel, because I'm like, there's so many big plot holes and things that I don't understand as the reader. And the only reason I finished this book, like I had some kind of hope. I was really holding out because I'm like, maybe I'm just not understanding. And honestly, I like almost gaslit myself into thinking like, maybe I'm just not paying close enough attention. I would literally go back and re-listen to the audiobooks, literally stare into nothing and listen to the audiobook, because I'm like, surely I'm just not paying attention and that's why I'm not understanding it. No. Nothing is explained properly. There's no good distinction of the world building, the laws, the magical rules, these people, these societies. Nothing. They give us crumbs. So, unfortunately, and I really hate to do this because I had so many high hopes for this book, and I was really like, I went into this thinking that I was going to find my new obsession. I'm really saddened to say this, but I think I'm going to have to give this book a 1 out of 5. I really could not get down with, again, the world building, the magical rules. Nothing makes sense. I'm going to list some of my other questions I had. Malik does not have a character arc. I thought we were going to have an arc of him learning to be trusting because he's just so like untrusting of people in general because he grew up in the foster system, which is great. But then that fear is only reinforced at the end of the book. So it's just like, what was his arc? What did he learn? Because he didn't learn how to respect women. He didn't learn how to be a good person. The only redeeming part of his character is his relationship with his foster brother. And it's not even like super intense. It's just like, oh yeah, I genuinely just care about my little brother, which is great, but it's like, give me something new. I also have questions about Alexis and her character. How does she end up at Cayman University? Because again, she was in foster care. She was adopted miraculously by other conjurers, and then they don't also adopt Malik even though he has the abilities. So my question is, why wasn't he adopted? Why wasn't he ever adopted throughout this whole book? Again, with the magic system, it seems that the magic is ancestral. So my question is anyone with African ancestry able to use magic? Because they don't make it seem that way. There's really no distinction of who has magic and who doesn't. What are the limits to their magic? We've seen Malik get tired, but it's always attributed to him being like new and not having a good grasp on his powers. No one else goes through that issue. Mama Aya, his grandmother, is very crucial to the plot, and she often gives a lot of information to drive the plot. Her character is literally just to tell Malik important things he needs to know, and it often feels like she's the only reason pushing the narrative. So it's just really awkward to read because anytime Malik needs to propel the narrative, he has to teleport home. So he's constantly flipping back between these two locations. And it's just very awkwardly written. Honestly, like sitting in front of this camera and talking about it, I'm just remembering everything that I was like, this is so weird. This book has the vibes, and I said this in one of my other videos, but this book, the dialogue between the characters oftentimes feels like Veronica from Riverdale being like, this so does not pass the Bechdel test. I'm so tired of the toxic masculinity in this hallway right now. It's literally just like buzzword after buzzword after buzzword. And I'm tired. Don't even get me started on the classroom scenes, because anytime they're in a classroom, they're learning about magic, right? So they'll be like, okay, today's class, we're gonna learn about hexes and everything, right? And then all of a sudden they're like, the representation of black witches in media is awful. And they say, literally, I'm gonna quote this, hashtag justice for Bonnie Bennett from fucking The Vampire Diaries. It literally always turns into, witches, black witches and wizards, they never get represented well in the media, and white people, blah 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 blah, they like their cute little versions of magic, but when we do it, it's bad. And it's like valid commentary about the representation of black people in media, and it's a wonderful conversation. But my question is, why the heck is it in this book? Why are these kids talking about it? They can literally do magic. It honestly, every time I read those scenes, it felt like a public service announcement. Whatever, fine, say what you want to say, but I beg, at least make it sound natural. At least make it sound like it's something someone would actually say in conversation and not on a TED Talk. I could literally go on all day. I've been recording for like 2 hours. I really can't fathom how much I took issue with this book. I want to reiterate that I don't want to hate on anyone. I don't have a book published. I don't know the first thing about publishing books. Who am I truly? I'm just a person on the internet with a camera and a microphone. My suggestions would be, get some sensitivity readers, and definitely get someone that will challenge you, will ask these questions that force you to think about the story you're trying to tell. You know, it's exciting to want to like write a story and like you get all caught up in just like the overall plot. It's really easy to skip over world building. And me personally, I'm always going to be the person that focuses on the world building because it's the thing that grounds me in a story. It's the thing that pushes me to read the story. I would suggest to the author to get someone that will challenge them, that will ask them these questions. And yeah, it could be annoying to constantly have someone poke holes in your story, but it builds a stronger story. And I'm not going to be so bold to say that I think that any of the misrepresentation of women, queer people, people of the deaf community is intentional or was malicious in any way. I don't think it was. I think it's truly just someone didn't look at it. Someone wasn't paying attention to these things. And that's why it's so important that you have a diverse group of people reading your books so that they can show you what you are missing out on as the writer. I don't think I will be continuing with this series just because there's so many glaring issues with it. I would need a really strong recommendation to continue this series because at this point I can't do it in good faith. I'm so sad. I really wanted to like this book so much because, again, we started off with such a bang. The introduction is so good. The author's note is so good. And then it fell flat. And I'm not encouraging any kind of hate towards the author because, again, writing a book is hard. And I don't think any of this was done maliciously. I hope that in the future that I see some growth. And I hope that this author and any author takes the negative criticism that people are giving and really just sit with it and think about it when you continue your projects. I'm not doing this to be mean. I'm not trying to hate on anyone. I genuinely wanted to see a better story, and I think this could very easily, it has all the good makings of a good story. It's just very disconjointed as a story. The world building does not hold up. There's a lot of questions that I'm left with as the reader, and there are some glaring issues with the representation of women and other people in this story. That's it. I can't speak any more on this. I will be talking for hours. There's so many things I took issue with. You can ignore everything I said in this review, but the one thing I will hold true is do better by women. The representation, the abuse of women in the story is genuinely awful. Like it's bad. And it hurts me more because it's avoidable. You can make a story that's for boys specifically, and that's great and that's fine. You can make a story that's meant for boys and not disrespect women. That's it. That's all I'm gonna say about it. I've been already saying too much. I've already got a lot to fight for. If anyone likes this book, that's fine. I'm not gonna be mean or say that like your taste is bad or whatever, because people like what they like and that's fine. I don't care. But if anyone felt similarly to me, please let me know. If you have read the book, if you're thinking about reading it, I suggest you do read it because I want to have this conversation. I want to see what other people think about this. As with all my reviews, I want to hear if people agree or they disagree, and I want to get all these different perspectives because, again, this is my interpretation. This is not in any way saying that this is how you have to read the book, but this is just how I read it, and my battery's dead. Check out Blood at the Root by Ladarrion Williams. This is his social media. Please feel free to follow him and go support him and his endeavors. Again, just because I didn't like the book doesn't mean you won't, and that you shouldn't support other authors. And definitely support the cover artist. The cover art is beautiful, and that was like one of the driving factors for why I wanted to read the book. Be sure to support me on all my social media at Listen to Kristen on TikTok and Instagram. And I just want to remind everyone that by watching this video, all the ad revenue for the entire month of June will be going to donations. There is currently a poll on my community tab. Feel free to vote in that about what percentage of the ad revenue will go to which organization. That is Doctors Without Borders, the Palestinian Children's Relief Fund, Operation Olive Branch, and a option for you to choose a charity for us to support. So I'll set aside a percentage to kind of divvy up between all the charities that are being referenced, and yeah, we're doing good work here. So anyway, with that being said, that is the end of the video. Honestly, I feel like a weight is lifted from my shoulders. I've had to sit with this and not being able to talk about it for a little bit less than a week, and it's been really weighing on my conscience. So I'm glad to get it all out. That's the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Please be nice in the comments. You can feel free to criticize me. I'm the one that's talking, but let's be nice to the author. Anyway.